the small, tight-knit communities of Idaho and Arizona. Few stories have shocked the public as deeply as the tale of Lori Vallow Daybell. Known to the world as the Doomsday Mom, Lori's descent into madness and criminality would become one of the most chilling and confounding criminal cases of the 21st century. What began as a case of missing children soon spiraled into a complex web of murder, religious extremism, and manipulative behavior, culminating in the deaths of Lori's 2 children and her former husband's mysterious passing. Lori Vallow Daybell's story defies logic and comprehension. A woman who seemed to have it all: children, family, a life built around community, was consumed by an ideology that led her to commit the unimaginable. Together with her husband, Chad Daybell, Lori embraced a set of beliefs that led them to abandon their moral compass and take violent actions they believed were part of a divine plan. But what was this plan? And how could a mother, whose primary role should be to protect her children, become the orchestrator of their deaths? The answer lies not just in Lori's actions, but in the extremist beliefs she adopted, the people she surrounded herself with, and the dangerous allure of apocalyptic ideologies that prey on the vulnerable. As this case unfolded, it became clear that the consequences of unchecked religious fervor, delusion, and manipulation were catastrophic. The chilling part of this story isn't just the tragic deaths, but the ideology that drove them and the wider implications of Lori's choices. With the deaths of her 2 children, Joshua J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, the collapse of her family, and the twisted nature of her relationship with Chad Daybell, this story has captivated millions, raising questions about faith, morality, and accountability. In this detailed exploration, we will delve into the shocking timeline of events that led to Lori Vallow Daybell's conviction, the manipulation behind her beliefs, the emotional toll it took on the victims' families, and the national conversation that followed. From missing children to public trial, from radical religious beliefs to the final sentencing, we will break down the case in all its complexity. This is the story of the Doomsday Mom, a tale of loss, obsession, and the far-reaching consequences of unchecked extremism. Section 1. The Doomsday Belief and Lori Vallow's transformation. Lori Vallow Daybell's journey into darkness did not start overnight. In fact, her life before meeting Chad Daybell seemed relatively normal. Born in 1973, Lori was a mother of 3 with a complicated personal history. She had been married twice before meeting Chad, and her personal life was marked by multiple relationships that ended in divorce, while her previous marriages and relationships were troubled. They did not seem to suggest that Lori was capable of the extreme action she would later take. However, everything changed when Lori crossed paths with Chad Daybell, a man who would deeply influence her beliefs and ultimately drive her to commit horrific acts. Chad, a self-proclaimed prophet, had a dangerous obsession with the apocalypse. He believed that the world was about to end and that only a select few would survive the coming cleansing. He had written several books about the end of the world and had become a figure of influence in the so-called doomsday religious community. He claimed to have received visions from God about the fate of the world, and it was these beliefs that would lure Lori in and shape her own worldview. Chad and Lori's relationship quickly deepened. Both of them embraced apocalyptic beliefs, and together they formed a world where good and evil were divided into 2 categories, light and dark. According to their beliefs, certain individuals, including some of Lori's closest family members, were dark and needed to be removed for the world to move forward. This belief system, which was deeply rooted in their understanding of the Bible and end times prophecy, would soon take a deadly turn. Lori, who had been a devoted mother to her children, began to view them through the lens of this extreme ideology. She began to believe that her 2 youngest children, Joshua J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, had been possessed by dark spirits. To Lori, the children, whom she had raised and loved, were no longer her innocent babies. In her mind, they had become obstacles to her and Chad's apocalyptic mission. The belief that the children were dark became the rationale Lori used to justify their deaths. At the same time, Lori's relationship with Chad deepened into an obsession. Chad, who was already married to another woman, began to believe that his own wife, Tammy Daybell, was an obstacle to his divine mission. After Tammy's suspicious death, originally thought to be of natural cousins Chad and Lori's bond grew stronger. They became inseparable, both in their personal lives and in their twisted beliefs. Together, they believed that the world was about to face its final judgment, and they were the chosen ones tasked with preparing for that judgment by eliminating those who were dark. For Lori, the path to murder was paved by her devotion to this ideology. In early 2019, Lori began to withdraw from her social circles, distancing herself from her friends and family. She grew closer to Chad, and the 2 became increasingly isolated in their beliefs. They began to share a vision of a new world, one in which they would be together and live in peace after ridding the world of those they deemed evil. Lori's belief in the necessity of purging the world of dark individuals became the foundation for the murders of her 2 children and the conspiracy to kill her former husband. What was once a mother's love for her children quickly deteriorated into something far darker and more dangerous. Lori no longer saw her children as the innocent lives she had once cherished, but as obstacles to her ultimate goal: survival in an apocalyptic world. The transformation of Lori Vallow from a mother who loved her children into a woman capable of orchestrating their murders is one of the most horrifying aspects of this case. Her belief in a doomsday narrative clouded her judgment, eroded her sense of morality, and led her to make decisions that defied the natural bond between mother and child. This descent into madness wasn't unique to Lori. Chad Daybell, too, became a key player in this apocalyptic narrative. His teachings were both a manipulation and a guide, pulling Lori deeper into a world where the ends justified the means. As they spiraled together into a world of darkness and delusion, they began to believe that the murders of JJ and Tylee were necessary sacrifices for the greater good. As Lori and Chad's twisted beliefs took hold, the reality of their actions became more terrifying. The disappearance of JJ and Tylee, once thought to be a case of neglect, soon turned into one of the most gruesome murder investigations in recent history. Their belief system not only led to the deaths of these innocent children, but also to the loss of innocence and sanity within their own lives. As we continue with this investigation into Lori Vallow Daybell's descent into madness, the question remains: how could someone who was once a mother, a daughter, and a wife transform into someone capable of taking the lives of the ones she loved the most? How did this belief system, steeped in apocalyptic visions, blind Lori to the sanctity of life? What role did Chad Daybell play in her transformation? And most importantly, how could the love of a mother turn into something so destructive? In the next section, we will delve into the events leading up to the deaths of Lori's children and explore the chilling details behind their tragic murders. Conclusion: the descent of Lori Vallow Daybell into religious extremism and murder is a complex and deeply disturbing case that touches on themes of fanaticism, manipulation, and the ultimate betrayal of a mother's love for her children. From a seemingly normal woman to a convicted murderer, Lori's story challenges our understanding of how belief systems can shape our actions and blur the lines between right and wrong. In Part 2, we will examine the critical moments leading to the deaths of JJ and Tylee, the investigation that followed, and the chilling revelations that brought Lori Vallow Daybell's criminal activities to light. Part 2, the disappearance of JJ and Tylee, a family's dark secret unravels. The year 2019 marked the beginning of a harrowing series of events that would forever change the lives of several families. What started as the seemingly ordinary life of a mother and her 2 children, Joshua J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, would quickly descend into an unspeakable tragedy. The tale of the Vallow family took a chilling turn when the 2 children mysteriously vanished from their home in Idaho, sending shockwaves through their community and triggering a widespread investigation that would unravel a disturbing story of murder, manipulation, and fanaticism. Before their disappearance, JJ and Tylee were well known in their community. JJ, a 7-year-old boy with special needs, was described by his school teachers and classmates as a joyful and energetic child who had a bright personality. His adoption into the Vallow family, where he found love and stability, was a moment of hope for the boy who had been through a turbulent early life. Tylee, JJ's 16-year-old sister, was a typical teenager, full of life and ambition. She was described by friends as independent, friendly, and caring. However, the world JJ and Tylee knew would collapse when their mother, Lori Vallow, became involved with Chad Daybell, a self-proclaimed prophet who preached about the coming end of the world and the purification of the righteous. The couple's shared obsession with apocalyptic beliefs and visions of a new world would soon destroy the family's sense of normalcy and lead to the murder of 2 innocent children. The vanishing, a mother's evasive behavior. In September 2019, JJ and Tylee vanished from their home. At first, Lori, who had been living with her children in Idaho, made vague and inconsistent statements about their whereabouts. She claimed that Tylee had gone to visit friends, while JJ was staying with other family members. However, as time passed, Lori's story began to unravel. There were no phone calls, no messages, and no indications that either child was safe or even alive. When friends and family grew concerned, they began to ask questions. Lori's answers were evasive, and she began to isolate herself even further. At the same time, her behavior became increasingly erratic. She and Chad fled to Hawaii, continuing their relationship while the authorities back in Idaho scrambled to find answers. Lori refused to cooperate with the police and didn't appear to have any concern for the well-being of her children. This indifference raised suspicions, and it wasn't long before an official investigation was launched. As the investigation into the missing children began, the authorities uncovered even more disturbing details. Lori's new life with Chad, filled with religious fervor and apocalyptic thinking, was beginning to overshadow the real-world concerns of raising 2 children. To Lori, her children seemed to be an obstacle to her spiritual mission, which had begun to consume her every thought. While the case of missing children is always tragic, the story of JJ and Tylee took on a darker tone. Lori's inability to explain her children's disappearance or to show any remorse about their absence seemed almost deliberate. Her obsession with her new life with Chad Daybell and her belief in the end of days narrative suggested that she had no intention of raising her children any longer. The discovery of the bodies, a gruesome revelation as the investigation into the disappearance continued. Authorities began to piece together troubling evidence. The final break in the case came when police obtained a search warrant for Chad Daybell's property. On June 9, 2020, investigators discovered the remains of both children buried in a shallow grave on Chad's land. The discovery was nothing short of horrifying. The remains of JJ were found in a small, makeshift grave, and Tylee's body was found dismembered and burned in a fire pit. JJ's remains were easily identifiable, and the condition of the body showed signs of having been deliberately hidden for several months. Tylee's remains were more difficult to identify due to the extent of the damage. It was later determined that Tylee had been dismembered, her body burned, and the remains disposed of in the fire pit. The brutality of the murders and the callousness with which Lori and Chad disposed of their children's bodies sent shockwaves through the nation. The authorities had discovered the worst possible outcome, but the questions surrounding the motives behind the murders still remained. Why did Lori and Chad, who had been so consumed by their belief in an impending apocalypse, feel the need to kill the innocent children? How had they justified such a brutal act in their minds? What had gone so wrong in Lori's thinking that she could kill her own children, who had once been the center of her world? The motive, religious extremism and delusion motive behind the murders began to take shape. As investigators dug deeper into the lives of Lori and Chad, it was clear that their belief system, which was rooted in doomsday prophecies and extreme religious ideology, had been the driving force behind the deaths. Both Lori and Chad had embraced the idea that the world was on the brink of collapse, and they believed that certain people, those they deemed to be dark or possessed, needed to be removed in order to make way for the righteous. Chad, who had written numerous books about the coming apocalypse and the need for survival, became a central figure in Lori's descent into madness. Their relationship, which began as a spiritual connection, soon turned into a dangerous partnership. Chad's teachings about good versus evil, light versus dark, and the need to purify the world were absorbed by Lori, who had already been struggling with personal losses and emotional upheaval. To Lori, her children, who had once been the light of her life, had now become an impediment to her spiritual journey. She believed that they were possessed by dark spirits, and that their removal was necessary to fulfill her divine mission. The belief that the children were dark justified their deaths. In Lori's mind, she saw their murders as part of a larger plan, a necessary sacrifice to prepare for the arrival of the second coming. This warped thinking, paired with Chad's dangerous influence, led to the devastating decision to murder her own flesh and blood. This belief system, which placed apocalyptic thinking at the center of their lives, made Lori and Chad feel that they were above the law. The murders were not just an act of violence, but a part of a greater spiritual journey that they believed would ultimately lead to a utopian world. This distorted view of reality and the idea that they were executing divine will made it possible for Lori and Chad to justify the horrific actions they took. The legal and public fallout, a nation in shock discovery of JJ and Tylee's bodies, ignited a national outcry. People across the country were horrified that a mother could be capable of such extreme acts, especially driven by religious extremism. As the tales of Lori's beliefs and her relationship with Chad came to light, public outrage grew. The case was not only about the deaths of 2 innocent children, but also about the dangers of unchecked religious fanaticism and the manipulation of vulnerable individuals. The investigation soon expanded beyond Idaho, with authorities questioning Chad Daybell, who was arrested and charged with multiple counts related to the murders. Lori Vallow Daybell was also arrested, facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder, child abandonment, and multiple counts of murder. The media quickly dubbed her the Doomsday Mom, and her case became a subject of intense public scrutiny. People across the nation were left grappling with the question, how could a mother, who had once appeared to be loving and caring, transform into someone capable of such horrific violence? Lori's trial was set to be one of the most high-profile in recent history, drawing comparisons to other infamous criminal cases where religious extremism played a role in the commission of murder. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the defense team for Lori Vallow Daybell attempted to argue that she was influenced by Chad and that she was not fully responsible for her actions. However, the overwhelming evidence against her, including the confessions, the bodies of the children, and the testimonies from family members, painted a damning picture of a woman consumed by delusion and madness. Conclusion: a heartbreaking into an unfathomable story. The case of Lori Vallow Daybell is a tragic and horrifying reminder of how dangerous and destructive religious extremism can be. When it is left unchecked, the lives of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan were brutally cut short by the very person who should have loved and protected them. Lori's descent into madness, fueled by Chad Daybell's dangerous beliefs, led to the deaths of 2 innocent children and the unraveling of a family. For the families of J.J. and Tylee, the emotional toll of their loss is immeasurable, despite the legal proceedings and the eventual sentencing of Lori Vallow Daybell. There is no justice that can undo the pain caused by her actions. As the case continues to captivate the nation, it serves as a somber reminder of the importance of questioning extremist ideologies and the devastating consequences that can result when faith becomes twisted and manipulated. As we reflect on this case, we can only hope that the story of J.J. and Tylee and the justice they received will serve as a lesson to prevent future tragedies like this one. In the end, the light of these 2 children will shine brightly as a reminder that no ideology, no belief system should ever justify the taking of innocent lives. Part 3. The Murder of Tammy Daybell. A darker twist to the Doomsday story. Story of Lori Vallow Daybell is one fraught with manipulation, twisted ideologies, and cold-blooded murder. However, the deaths of her 2 children, Joshua J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, were not the only tragic events linked to her. As the investigation into the murders of her children progressed, another chilling discovery was made: the suspicious death of Tammy Daybell, Chad Daybell's wife, who died just weeks before J.J. and Tylee went missing. Tammy's death initially seemed unremarkable, ruled as natural causes. However, as police began to uncover the deeper layers of the case, it became clear that Tammy's death was anything but natural. This revelation would add another layer of complexity to the already intricate and disturbing case. The story of Tammy Daybell's death is one of the most chilling aspects of this saga, as it shows just how far Lori and Chad were willing to go in their quest for a twisted and delusional life together. The mysterious death of Tammy Daybell. Tammy Daybell, 49, had been married to Chad Daybell for nearly 3 decades when her life was tragically cut short. The couple had been living in Rexburg, Idaho, where they were part of a religious community that embraced doomsday beliefs. Tammy, like many others who were close to Lori and Chad, had no idea that she was living under the shadow of death. In October 2019, Tammy Daybell was found dead in her bed, and the cause of death was initially attributed to natural causes, possibly a heart attack or other undisclosed medical issue. Her family, shocked and grieving, accepted the ruling, believing that Tammy had passed away peacefully in her sleep. However, things began to take a more suspicious turn when investigators started piecing together details of Chad and Lori's relationship and their involvement in the deaths of J.J. and Tylee. As they dug deeper, the authorities began to notice a troubling pattern. Chad, who had previously been married to Tammy, had quickly remarried Lori following Tammy's sudden death. This swift transition raised questions, and investigators began to focus on the possibility that Tammy's death had not been due to natural causes. The initial clues were subtle, but they pointed toward foul play. Chad, who was deeply involved in apocalyptic prophecies and visions, had been under scrutiny for his extreme beliefs and teachings. It was later revealed that Chad had been encouraging Lori to sever ties with family members who were dark or possessed. This included Lori's children, who were also considered dark by the couple's warped religious beliefs. The idea of light and dark individuals, which they based on their esoteric understanding of the world, had now extended to people in their lives, and tragically, Tammy was one of the people they saw as a threat to their newfound beliefs. The investigation into Tammy's death, uncovering the truth as investigators began to unravel the tragic and horrific details surrounding the disappearances of J.J. and Tylee. They turned their attention to Tammy's sudden and unexplained death. They exhumed Tammy Daybell's body in December 2019, following the discovery of the children's remains, and an autopsy revealed that she had, in fact, been poisoned. The cause of death was ultimately determined to be asphyxiation, a direct result of poisoning likely from a substance administered in her sleep. The investigation found that Chad Daybell was directly involved in Tammy's death. He had been the one to report her death to authorities, and it was now clear that her passing was not natural, as initially believed. Chad's behavior after her death was also suspicious, with his quick marriage to Lori just weeks after Tammy's death raising significant red flags. Furthermore, Chad's insistence on a private, rushed funeral for Tammy seemed designed to avoid further scrutiny. Authorities began to see the pattern of manipulation and violence that had been at the heart of the couple's actions. Lori, driven by her obsessive beliefs in a coming apocalypse, had been manipulated by Chad, who used his so-called prophecies to gain her trust. It became increasingly apparent that the couple's beliefs in the destruction of the dark people in their lives had become the catalyst for the deaths of not only Lori's children, but also her husband's previous wife, Tammy. Chad Daybell's role. From prophet to killer, Chad Daybell's involvement in the deaths of both his wife and Lori's children painted a disturbing portrait of a man whose manipulation and twisted religious beliefs ultimately led to tragedy. A self-proclaimed prophet with a belief in preparing for the end of days, Chad had written several books about the apocalypse. His teachings, which Lori had embraced, became the driving force behind the couple's decision to eliminate those they saw as obstacles to their plan. Chad had long been involved in a belief system that combined elements of Christianity with apocalyptic visions, resulting in a distorted worldview that justified murder. The couple's belief in light and dark spirits and the necessity of ridding the world of darkness led them to see the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy as part of a larger divine plan. While Lori had been heavily influenced by Chad's teachings, Chad's role in the murders was equally significant. It was clear that he had used his influence over Lori to encourage her to take extreme actions, including the murders of her children. Their shared belief that the world was destined for destruction was central to the twisted justification they had for eliminating anyone who they considered dark. Tammy, as Chad's wife, had been seen as an obstacle to his plans, and thus she had to be removed. The tragic irony, however, was that it was Chad's manipulation that led to both the loss of his wife and the deaths of Lori's children. The trial, Lori and Chad's defense after the discovery of Tammy's body and the unearthing of the remains of JJ and Tylee. Lori and Chad Daybell were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The legal proceedings that followed would bring to light the full scope of the manipulation and madness that had driven them to kill. Throughout their trial, both Lori and Chad maintained their innocence, although their defense strategies varied. Lori's defense team argued that she was under the influence of Chad and that she had been manipulated into believing that her actions were justified. However, the evidence presented in court painted a much darker picture. The testimonies from Lori's family and friends, along with the horrific discovery of the children's remains, led the prosecution to argue that Lori and Chad had conspired to commit murder, driven by their extreme religious beliefs. As the trial continued, the details of their relationship and the shocking nature of the murders came to light. Both Lori and Chad were depicted as manipulators, using their delusional beliefs to control and justify the deaths of those closest to them. Lori's own defense did little to convince the jury of her innocence. Instead, her behavior marked by indifference, a lack of remorse, and her willingness to embrace such a dangerous belief system cemented her role as an active participant in the murders. Chad, too, was faced with the full weight of his actions. His role as a prophet, which he had used to lure Lori into a world of fanaticism, would ultimately lead to his conviction. The couple's belief in their own superiority, the righteousness of their actions, and the view that they were somehow chosen by divine forces to carry out these murders only made the crimes more disturbing. Their shared belief system became a central part of the prosecution's argument, showing how dangerous and destructive such extremist ideologies can be when unchecked. The impact on the families of the victims, toll of these murders on the families of the victims, cannot be understated. The families of JJ and Lori Vallow were devastated by the deaths of their children, and the revelation that these children were murdered by their own mother left deep emotional scars that will never heal. Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandmother, has been a vocal advocate for justice, speaking out about the pain and loss she has endured since the murder of her grandson. For the family of Tammy Daybell, the loss was equally profound. Chad's children, who were already coping with their mother's death, were forced to reckon with the horrifying reality that their father was responsible for not only Tammy's death, but also the deaths of Lori's children. The emotional toll on all the families involved has been immense, and the trauma from these murders will linger for generations to come. At the sentencing, the families made their voices heard, and they called for the harshest punishments for Lori and Chad, seeking justice for their loved ones and an end to the nightmare that had destroyed their families. Conclusion: the unraveling of a doomsday narrative. A tragic story of Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell is one marked by manipulation, religious extremism, and the tragic deaths of innocent people. The murders of JJ, Tylee, and Tammy are a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked belief systems and the devastating impact that fanaticism can have on people's lives. As Lori and Chad face life sentences, the question remains: how far will people go when they believe they are carrying out a divine mission? The influence of religion and ideology on human behavior is powerful, and when twisted by delusion, it can lead to unspeakable acts of violence. The case of Lori and Chad Daybell will continue to serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of extremism and the importance of holding individuals accountable for their actions, no matter what belief system they may be operating under. This case has left a lasting impact on the victims' families, the public, and the criminal justice system, as it serves as a stark reminder of the importance of safeguarding against dangerous ideologies and ensuring that Justice is served in the face of such profound tragedy. Part 4. The Trial. A nation watches as Lori and Chad Daybell face justice as the gruesome details surrounding the murders of J.J. Vallow, Tylee Ryan, and Tammy Daybell came to light. The legal proceedings that followed became a focal point for both the families of the victims and the wider public. The case of Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell gripped the nation, drawing attention not only because of the brutal nature of the crimes, but also because of the bizarre and terrifying belief system that fueled their actions. The public spectacle of the trial, the shock of the testimony, and the emotional toll it took on the families were compounded by the complexity of the case itself. The Daybells, who had been living in a delusional world of apocalyptic visions, would now have to face the consequences of their actions in the courtroom. The charges, murder, conspiracy, and more. Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell were each charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and the abandonment of Lori's children, J.J. and Tylee. Lori faced additional charges related to the conspiracy to murder her former spouse, Charles Vallow, who had been killed earlier in 2019 under suspicious circumstances. The case against the couple was a complex one, filled with layers of deceit, manipulation, and fanaticism. At the heart of the prosecution's case was the argument that Lori and Chad had conspired to kill those they believed were dark and who, in their eyes, were obstacles to their apocalyptic mission. The couple's shared belief in a coming end of the world had convinced them that certain people, including Lori's children and Chad's wife, needed to be eliminated for the greater good of their supposed divine mission. The prosecution's case was built on a combination of evidence, including the discovery of the children's bodies, the timeline of events surrounding their deaths, testimony from family members, and the couple's own actions leading up to the murders. The prosecution's theory was that Lori, influenced by Chad's extremist religious beliefs, had allowed her children to be murdered in cold blood, driven by the idea that the world would be purged of evil as part of an impending apocalypse. In addition to the murders of her children, Lori was implicated in the death of her former husband, Charles Vallow, whose death had initially been ruled as self-defense. As investigators unearthed further details, it became clear that Lori had been involved in orchestrating Charles' death, alongside her brother Alex Cox, who was also implicated in the killing. For Chad, the charges were equally severe. His role as the instigator of the Doomsday ideology and his involvement in Tammy Daybell's suspicious death were central to the case. He had been the spiritual leader who convinced Lori that her children were possessed by evil spirits, justifying their murders in the name of divine intervention. His own actions, including his quick marriage to Lori just weeks after his wife's death, were seen as manipulative and opportunistic. The defense, an attempt to deflect responsibility as the trial began. The defense for both Lori and Chad Daybell sought to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. Lori's defense team argued that she was under Chad's influence and that she had not fully understood the consequences of her actions. They claimed that Lori had been manipulated by Chad, who had encouraged her to believe that her children were evil and needed to be removed to fulfill a higher purpose. Lori's defense team painted her as a victim of psychological coercion, emphasizing her emotional instability and her obsessive attachment to Chad. They suggested that Lori's involvement in the murders was less about malicious intent and more about a misguided belief that she was following a higher calling. The defense also tried to present Lori's emotional outbursts as evidence that she had been manipulated by Chad and was not fully aware of the gravity of her actions. For Chad, the defense was more straightforward. His attorneys argued that the charges against him were based on circumstantial evidence, and they suggested that he had no direct involvement in the deaths of the Vallow children. They attempted to portray him as a man of faith who had done nothing wrong but had been swept up in a tragic set of events beyond his control. Despite these defenses, the prosecution's case remained strong. The evidence against the Daybells was damning, and their attempts to shift blame only served to highlight the extent of their manipulation. The testimonies from the families of the victims, particularly from J.J. and Tylee's grandparents, were deeply emotional and compelling. These accounts painted a picture of a mother and a man who had allowed their twisted beliefs to override basic human decency. The role of religion and apocalyptic beliefs at the center of the trial was the question of religion and influence of apocalyptic thinking on Lori and Chad's actions. Both had become deeply immersed in doomsday prophecies, and their shared obsession with preparing for the end of the world was a significant factor in the murders. Chad Daybell's self-published books, which focused on preparing for the apocalypse and the need to rid the world of evil people, became a central part of the couple's belief system. Chad's influence over Lori was evident in the way she began to adopt his views, distancing herself from her family and becoming more isolated in her beliefs. The couple's belief that certain people, including Lori's children, were dark spirits that needed to be eradicated became the justification for their actions. This belief in the righteousness of their mission, combined with their manipulative behavior, created a dangerous environment where murder was not only justified, but deemed necessary for many. The most troubling aspect of the case was the idea that Lori, a mother, could allow herself to be so consumed by a belief system that she would murder her own children. The prosecution argued that Lori's actions were not the result of psychological instability or manipulation, but rather the consequences of a deep-seated commitment to her beliefs. She had chosen, consciously and willingly, to follow Chad's vision of a new world, one that required the deaths of those she deemed dark. The Daybell shared apocalyptic vision was a dangerous and destructive force. It highlighted the power that extremist ideologies can have over individuals, pushing them to commit acts of extreme violence. The trial became a broader commentary on the dangers of religious extremism and the lengths to which people can go when they believe their actions are sanctioned by a higher power. The trial's impact on the victims' families as the trial proceeded. The emotional toll on the families of the victims was impossible to ignore. The families of JJ and Tylee, who had spent months searching for answers and hoping against hope that their children were still alive, were forced to confront the brutal reality that their loved ones had been murdered. Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandmother, became a central figure in the fight for justice. Her determination to see Lori held accountable for the death of her grandson was palpable throughout the trial. Woodcock, along with other members of the victims' families, gave emotional testimonies, recounting their love for the children and the pain they had endured since their disappearance. Their statements painted a vivid picture of the deep and lasting trauma caused by Lori's actions. For the families, the trial was not just about seeking justice, but about coming to terms with the loss of their loved ones who had been taken from them so brutally and unnecessarily. The emotional impact of the case was also felt in the courtroom, where even the defense team struggled to maintain a sense of objectivity in the face of such overwhelming grief. The family's courage in facing their pain head-on provided a stark contrast to the cold, calculated behavior of the defendants. The verdict, a bitter end to a tragic saga after weeks of testimony. The trial finally came to a close. The jury deliberated for several days before reaching a verdict on the charges of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and child abandonment. Both Lori and Chad Daybell were found guilty. The verdict was a moment of justice for the victims and their families, but it did little to ease the pain of the children's senseless deaths. Lori Vallow Daybell was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, for the murders of her 2 children and a conspiracy to kill her ex-husband, Charles Vallow. Chad Daybell was also sentenced to life in prison, with additional charges for the murder of his wife, Tammy Daybell, adding to his conviction. The sentence, while a measure of justice, was bittersweet for the families who had lost so much. As Lori and Chad were led away in handcuffs, the families of the victims could begin the difficult process of healing, but the scars left by these murders would remain for a lifetime. The trial had brought the truth to light, but it could never undo the damage done by the Daybells' twisted beliefs and the murders they committed in the name of a false prophecy. Conclusion: a legacy of tragedy and warning. The case of Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell is a tragic reminder of the dangers of unchecked extremism, religious manipulation, and the devastating consequences of believing in a warped, apocalyptic vision. The deaths of JJ and Tylee Vallow and the murder of Tammy Daybell will forever haunt the families involved and the broader community. As we reflect on this tragic saga, the lessons are clear. When belief becomes a justification for violence, the consequences are catastrophic. The trial and conviction of Lori and Chad Daybell have served to bring justice to the victims and have shed light on the destructive power of extremist ideologies. However, the emotional scars left by these murders will remain long after the legal proceedings have ended, reminding us of the enduring need to protect vulnerable individuals from the dangers of manipulation and fanaticism. Part 5: The Aftermath. A cautionary tale for the world. The tragic saga of Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell's doomsday beliefs and the subsequent murders of 2 innocent children, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan, alongside the suspicious death of Tammy Daybell, has left a permanent scar on the lives of the victims' families. The chilling nature of their crimes and the twisted religious ideology that fueled them has captivated the world and sparked discussions on the dangers of religious extremism, manipulation, and the psychological impact of such beliefs. But the story doesn't end with the verdicts. The aftermath of the case continues to unfold, affecting not only the families of the victims, but also the broader societal conversation about the perils of unchecked extremism and the role of religion in justifying violence. The media attention on the case, the various trials, and the legal ramifications will undoubtedly linger for years to come. The families of the victims, who have endured unimaginable loss, are now left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. For Kay Woodcock, JJ's grandmother, and other loved ones, the trial was a moment of painful justice, but it cannot erase the lasting trauma. The emotional toll of losing children and family members in such a horrific manner is profound, and no legal proceedings can undo the harm done by Lori and Chad's actions in the public eye. The case has raised significant questions about how extreme belief systems can cloud moral judgment and push individuals toward violence. The murder of Lori's children is a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities in society, how easily people can fall prey to dangerous ideologies and how destructive those beliefs can be. As the world reflects on this case, it is crucial to address the broader issue of extremist thinking and its dangerous consequences. At the same time, the legal aftermath of the case continues to unravel, while Lori and Chad Daybell have been convicted. The conversation surrounding their extremist beliefs and the influence they had over one another is ongoing. The legal system will likely face continued scrutiny regarding its handling of religiously motivated crimes and whether adequate measures are in place to prevent such tragic events from occurring in the future. The ripple effect, impact on communities, and religion. The case has not only affected the victims' families, but also raised important discussions within the communities that once surrounded Lori and Chad. Their belief system, which combined elements of Christianity with apocalyptic visions, has left a trail of destruction among those who once considered them to be trustworthy figures. Many followers of Chad Daybell, particularly those who had been involved in his religious community, now face the difficult task of reconciling their faith with the reality of the crimes that were committed. The power of charisma and persuasive influence in religious movements is evident in this case. Lori and Chad's ability to manipulate and control the beliefs of those around them is a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked authority in religious or spiritual settings. As the story of the Daybells continues to unfold, it is critical to examine how these kinds of belief systems can become breeding grounds for manipulation, violence, and ultimately, murder. Preventing future tragedies, a call for vigilance. The story of Lori and Chad Daybell is a cautionary tale, one that highlights the need for vigilance in recognizing and addressing signs of extreme ideological thinking before it leads to violence. This case is not just about the individuals who murdered in cold blood, but about the broader societal issues that allowed these beliefs to flourish unchecked. Preventing future tragedies like this one requires a multifaceted approach, including increased awareness of the dangers of extremism, better mental health support for individuals susceptible to harmful ideologies, and more robust legal frameworks to deal with religiously motivated crimes. Communities must be vigilant in recognizing the warning signs of radicalization, especially when it involves children, and take steps to intervene before it's too late. Additionally, this case calls attention to the importance of family and community in protecting vulnerable individuals from becoming involved in dangerous belief systems. The family of JJ and Tylee fought tirelessly to raise awareness about the children's disappearance, and their efforts ultimately played a critical role in uncovering the truth. It is a powerful reminder that when people see something wrong, they must speak up and take action to protect those who are vulnerable. Conclusion: a legacy of tragedy, justice, and reflection. The story of Lori Vallow Daybell, Chad Daybell, and their tragic victims is one of darkness, manipulation, and loss. But as justice has been served, and Lori and Chad face the consequences of their actions, the story also serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of critical thinking, emotional support, and the need to combat extremism in all its forms. As we reflect on this case, we must acknowledge the victims, the innocent children, and the families left behind, JJ and Tylee, whose lives were stolen by the very people who should have loved and protected them, will never be forgotten. Their tragic deaths are a haunting reminder of the dangers of blind faith and unchecked belief. But the hope for justice, however painful, is the first step toward healing for the victims' families. Their bravery and resilience have shown the world that no matter how dark the story may seem, there is always hope in seeking the truth and holding those responsible for their actions accountable. This case serves as a somber reminder of the dangers of fanaticism, extremism, and the devastating effects it can have on innocent lives. As we continue to cover cases like this one, we invite you to stay connected with Room 57 for in-depth analysis and breaking news on the most gripping and complex criminal investigations. If you found this case compelling and want to learn more about the ongoing trials, investigations, and the impact of such tragic events, subscribe to Room 57 for exclusive content and upgrades. Don't forget to like this video, share it with others to spread awareness about the dangers of religious extremism and manipulation, and hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss out on our latest videos. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and let us know what you think about the case. How do you think we can prevent tragedies like this in the future? What lessons can we learn from this devastating story? Your feedback is important as we continue to explore the darkest corners of crime and justice. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to Room 57, where we dive deep into the stories that matter together. Let's work towards a safer and more aware world.